Hello, everyone. Let you all get connected for a second. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1094th New Social Environment. I'm Magali, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Naudline Pierre and Amber Jamilla Musser. And now I'll introduce the guests and hosts. Naudline Pierre's paintings draw from fantasy and iconography to create alternate worlds. Swirling with jewel tone texture, her works center ecstasy, devotion, and tenderness and epic scenes that generate space for rescue and healing. Pierre's winged figures are enveloped in vast, horizonless landscapes where they come together in acts of intimacy and salvation. They reach longingly towards each other, congregate and embrace, emoting protection and care. Amber Jamilla Musser is a professor of English and Africana Studies at the CUNY Graduate Center. She's the author of Sensational Flesh, Race, Power, and Masochism, Sensual Excess, Queer Femininity, and Brown Jouissance, and Between Shadows and Noise, Sensation, Situatedness, and the Undisciplined. Her research focuses on the intersections of Black feminism, sexuality, and the aesthetics. And I'll hand it over to Amber to get us started.
Right. Thank you, Magli. Naudline, it's so wonderful to have you here today. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's great to be here.
I just want to start us off, and I guess I'm wondering maybe we can sort of play the slideshow simultaneous to this so that everybody can see what we're talking about. But I want to talk about myth, since that is within the title of the show, but also sort of one of your big preoccupations. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what myth means to you.
To me, myth means possibility. It means freedom and a sort of way to readjust how you see the world and how you experience it. And um, specifically for this body of work, it's about digging deeper into some characters that were kind of like on the sidelines in my other works, my previous works. So it's about kind of like building up that mythical world and sort of giving them a chance to have the stage and um, really be themselves and just exist.
That I was going to ask you a little bit about the relationship between myth and religion too, because I'd read in other interviews that some of your interest in myth is related to your relationship to religion.
Yeah, I mean, everyone asks that question with good reason. I think there's a lot of religious iconography in my work and some symbols and things that you can kind of link to a sort of Christian religion. Um, but for me, it's more so about the religion of making this work. But I did come from a really religious home and sort of a home that was focused on um, the apocalypse and understanding that my existence here isn't all there is, that I would be waiting for something else in another world, a world that's like set up in a better way. So there was always this sort of longing for what I couldn't see or experience or feel in the moment, but had to sort of imagine in order to keep going.
That's very interesting. I'm curious. I think part of the reason I wanted to ask you about religion also, so not only that particular background, but also just the experience of viewing the artwork, because they're so large, and so all encompassing. So I'm wondering if you had thoughts on kind of how the way scale maybe plays with some of these elements of kind of engulfment or transportation to an elsewhere.
Yeah, I wanted to feel the works, or I always want the works to feel like a door into another place. And so for me, that means making the figures close to life size or around that kind of scale. And it's very much like walking into a beautiful cathedral and having frescoes and sort of statues and carvings and I think of El Greco and some of those really large paintings and ascensions and things like that. So I think based on sort of art historical connections, I would say it's that sort of religious painting, because there's something that's explained without words in paintings like that. And that's what I'm always trying to do.
I'm wondering if you could also talk about the, you can see this on this image here, but this particular show is beyond paintings. It also has these installations at the threshold. Um, what
Yeah.
yeah, to
Okay.
making
The
it concrete.
installations. I started kind of exploring iron um, at my last show with the gallery in 2021. And I made a few iron plinths with some structures on them, but I really focused in on making this wrought iron gate. And to me, it was sort of like a way to acknowledge change and like intentional change and walking through something and becoming something different. And the gate was made of fire and beings, and that kind of stood for a gate into the world that I'm creating. And that show was titled Enter the Realm. So when I was thinking about this body of work, this kind of concept, I wanted to come back to the iron work, but in a way that um, feels like, thanks for pulling that up, feels like an altarpiece that I made in 2023, where I felt like I wanted to do something really graphic and very like hard and present, to kind of work with some of the softer edges in my work. And so I wanted to kind of play off of this language and still create a sort of gate, but in a way that's a little bit more integrated in the space and architecture.
I think related to this gate question, I've been in seeing the show, a lot of me was wondering, um, I guess about the relationship between the figures within each painting and then where the viewer is supposed to, you're imagining the viewer, right? Are we invited into this world, like this threshold, or are we kind of watching it in a voyeuristic sort of way? Um,
I think a bit of both. I see myself also as a kind of voyeur, and I'm being given images and they're sort of trusting me with images of themselves, but I'm outside looking in as well when I'm not in the act of painting. And it's in the act of painting that I can directly connect with them. But then after that, it's like I'm out of the portal. And so um, I think that this work has a lot of different doors to go through. It has windows, skylight, ever. And I think you just choose how you want to enter the work. Um, so it is inviting, but it's also like a sort of, if you know, you know, like if you want to approach the work from a certain lens, you can. If you want to approach it from another one, you can. It's shape shifty, it's slippery, and it escapes capture.
I mean, if we stay with this image here, the eternal understanding, I'm wondering if we can delve a little bit more into the particular mythological qualities of it. So when I saw the show, a lot of what I was thinking about, and you can definitely correct me, but was the Greek myth of the harpy, which is sort of meant to embody the spirit of the wind. And even within, if we look like closely in the clouds, you sort of see faces. And there's like a lot of swirling around the wind, and obviously the wings. But I'm curious if you had particular points of mythic entry for these figures. Um,
So I consider myself to be a sponge and kind of absorb everything that I'm exposed to, everything I experience. Um, but I wasn't quite thinking specifically about, Greek mythology or whatever. I was just thinking about, how do I make this being appear as they want me to have them appear? It's more of like a one-on-one, but that doesn't mean that other mythological images or storylines or whatever don't make their way into the work. It's all part of it, but I don't pick and choose. I'm a vessel. I allow things to come to the canvas I'm in service to the work, and I go from there. But it does hold a lot. It holds a lot of history. It holds a lot of art history. It holds a lot of personal history. But then others can see themselves in the work too. So, like I said, it's about this multiplicity. You can see the work and kind of think about um, Greek myths or whatever, but you can also see the work and think of a sort of science fiction um, environment, or you can look at it and kind of feel like, oh, these are angelic celestial beings. And I think I'm fine with one thing being many things. And to me, that's freedom.
I mean, I think in that kind of the multiplicity of signifiers, I think there are two things that I want us to eventually kind of pick up on. One of them is kind of this, you talk about being a vessel, and I'm curious if you can elaborate a little bit more on like what that means. I think especially kind of given the beginning of the conversation, thinking with religion, right? Like that has one particular connotation. But I'd love to hear you elaborate a bit on that.
Sure. I consider myself a vessel because so much of this work is intuitive. Of course, there's all that other stuff, you know, context and whatever, but so much of it is intuitive. I feel like I have to wait on the paintings to tell me what they want and how they want to be seen. And in my mind, these characters exist in a faraway land, but they have given me a gift by coming to me. And I then respect what they want and sort of wait to receive what they want to give me and then make those images. So, in that way, I consider myself a vessel or a bridge between that world and this world, and kind of trying to bring images that I can understand from that world. And these characters are sort of coming to me in ways that I can understand. But they take many forms as well. So um, yeah, I think that's how I consider myself, to be a servant of the work, in service to it, a vessel. Um, I'm giving them agency and they're allowing me to have agency as well.
I mean, it feels like there's a little bit of an elemental quality to sort of what's coming through as well. Like I'm looking at the one that's on the screen too, and it feels like very fiery, but a lot of the other ones have a lot of wind, air quality. I'm wondering if that's part of if that's circulating for you as well, or
Yes, totally. Fire is a huge theme in my work, and it's been since the start of this sort of language for me, as another figure, as an entity, as a method of change, as something beautiful and sort of passionate, but also something malicious. It takes many forms. And in this body of work, it was sort of my first time really going into kind of portraying clouds and sky closer to what it looks like in reality, like this color palette with the blue sky and, you know, gray clouds. Usually I'm like hot pink and yellow and orange, but I wanted to kind of retract and kind of express a new color palette, specifically thinking about sort of academic painting in the 1800s and kind of frou-frou painting, society painting. And I wanted to kind of bring that into my color palette as well. But fire is a huge, huge element in my work, for all the reasons I stated before. And it keeps coming back to me in different forms. If I look at the way that I painted fire at the start of my, you know, career, it's different than to right now. And each time I painted in a different way, it's like evolving with me as well. So it is another figure in the work. It's another character. It's another symbol of a presence.
wow. I'm curious. I definitely want to hear more about the sort of the use of pastels and kind of like beyond just the. I have a feeling there's an answer that's beyond just wanting to be in conversation with 18th century painting. But I'm also curious if what elements of transformation you're finding in, I guess, communing with the sky and clouds.
I found it really pleasant, honestly. I wanted to make work and find joy, and I wanted to express joy and sort of give these characters a chance just to be. Um, and I think going into making the work with the sole purpose of having a good time and sort of enjoying the material, enjoying the color and mixing the paint on the canvas and on the palette. Um, yeah, I think that's what I was aiming for. But within that, there's all these other things that are underneath. Of course, the context in our history and some of these mythological creatures, what they stand for and what they do and what they mean. But I really had a good time making these paintings, and I really wanted to give myself that. I wanted to give myself the gift of pleasure and sort of that sensual experience with paint. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's striking how much movement there is. Like for me, that echoed with the what's happening with the thresholds too. It sort of seems like their hair. Um, I'm wondering how much movement is part of this pleasure. And also in the bio that Magali read, you talk a lot about ecstasy. So I'd love to hear more because it seems like it's something that you are experiencing, but you are also in some ways like depicting.
Yeah. Ecstasy. I think ecstasy in the work is like a means to escape and kind of recreate a place that I have more control in, but also imagining a different kind of existence. Um, I think ecstasy and flying for me are hand in hand in this idea of having beings with wings where they can control where they go and how high and how fast is really important to me. Um, I forgot the rest of your question.
I was interested, like all the movement, like we
Oh, the
can see
movement.
the swirls of, and if that was connected to ecstasy, or maybe not,
Yes,
maybe.
this body of work actually does have a lot more movement than previous bodies of work. I wanted to capture them in kind of in motion, dancing, you know, kind of loving each other, being around each other, touching each other. I wanted to kind of show that action, whereas in previous works I've had them more stationary in like scenes of care and vulnerability. And here they're allowed to be excited and experience ecstasy, and I'm allowed to also experience that while painting them. And I think the movement comes with the color. It comes with sort of reimagining how to paint the fire and kind of give it its own sort of life as a being in the painting, as a figure in the painting. So all of that movement represents kind of like this want for, I guess, bodily kind of movement for myself, but also for these characters.
That's so great. I think I'm also, it's interesting that within that movement, there's so many elements of the paintings that move, right? That like the wind is in motion, the figures are in motion, there's all of this. But it makes me also think about a little bit about kind of like the vibrancy of life that you're showing, that like everything kind of has I don't know what to call it, like
Life,
everything
it has
has a
like,
face, but it
yeah,
also
everything has a face. Everything is an entity. You know,
yeah.
not one thing is just there just because. It's there because they belong and because they can and because they choose to, whether it's clouds or fire or scales or whatever.
Do you feel like you see that as part of the extension of ecstasy or agency?
I do. I see it as freedom, and I also see it as a sort of um, celebration of the little things and the details and sort of the things that go kind of unnoticed in life, you know, when you're moving too fast. And so these characters are moving quickly, but they're also like embodying the space, and they're understanding that everything around them has life. Um, and yeah, it's like little reminders of life in every corner.
I mean, it's amazing how it emerges, especially because of the large scale, right? Like you really give viewers an opportunity to see so much of this snapshot of life, as opposed to if it was like really condensed into like a tiny,
Yeah.
um, well,
Yeah. No, I actually, what's interesting is that I really like to paint large scale or really, really small. In the middle, I kind of feel I can do it, but it's not my favorite. I think painting very small allows a certain type of intimacy in the making of the work, and painting it large also requires a certain intimacy of me, my body walking up to the canvas, being able to be eye to eye with the character, speaking to the character, feeling like we're one. So I do like painting minis sometimes. It's nice.
Well, I mean, you have to get very detailed also in the big ones too. So I can see that oscillation. I'm also curious if the painting big allows you a particular type of freedom of motion as well, because I mean the brush strokes are like pretty, not always, I guess, but often like they were seem to invite movement on your part. Um,
Yeah. Painting large scale makes me feel powerful. That's like at the basic level. It's like I can get on this ladder and make my body take up more space and kind of um, be big as well. Um, but in terms of like just the meaning of the work and scale and that, I think it's just about like feeling like I can place myself in there and others can too. Um, yeah.
yeah. Changing tack a little bit, I wonder if you have any thoughts on the feminine, which feels to me as though I don't want to assume anything about all of the mythic beings that you have painted here, but that seems to be like there are many that, for various reasons, kind of like seem to veer toward that space.
Totally. I guess I'm kind of painting a utopic picture of what as I would think would be a peaceful and well-intentioned sort of existence. These these characters, I'm not so focused on, you know, gender because I think they transcend gender, but they are a feminine power. There's no mistake about that. They are feminine presences. Um, and to me, I'm painting what I want to see. I'm painting what I want to feel. And hopefully that's getting, you know, translated to others as well. But it's mostly about painting something for myself and really enjoying it.
And I mean, I know that some of your previous work focused on like you painted yourself in literally as kind of like an avatar. And this work marks a departure from that. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the uses of the avatar.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
The avatar to me, though we shared likeness, is a completely separate entity. Um, I consider her a twin in another universe where we're growing sort of like parallel. So we share some experiences, but also she goes off and does her thing and comes back and shares with me. And I go off and do my thing and she comes back and shares with me. So it's not necessarily like looking in a mirror, but it's like looking through a portal and seeing someone I can relate to. But in most of my work up until now, she's been the center of the compositions, the center of the narrative. Um, and I feel like I'm responsible to listen to these characters. And I was feeling that she wanted some time to be away from, you know, the front of the work and kind of be implied rather than, you know, be the subject of the composition. And so I wanted to give her that space, that privacy to grow or grieve or do whatever she needs to do, while giving these other characters who usually were sort of like there to be in support to her, to help her fly, to help her harness the power of fire. Now they're kind of just there as who they are, not what they do. And they just exist. And it's kind of showing that behind the scenes with these accessory characters that aren't really accessories at all. They're powerful in their own right. They have their own feelings and experiences. And I really wanted, alongside with feeling joy in making the work, I wanted them to feel like they had a pedestal.
I mean, it's interesting that sort of the themes that keep emerging through the conversation, like the thresholds, the portal, kind of this idea that sort of everything is continually going on, whether you're there to witness it or not. And then sometimes you're privileged to like get a little insight and but that idea that sort of like these worlds have their own movement and structures regardless of what you are doing or not is very interesting. I saw also elsewhere that you talk about this process as healing, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think that what I carry with me, whether I know what it is or where it came from, or I can acknowledge it or not, flavors the work that I'm making, whether that's my personal history or whatever. It flavors the work. I think my upbringing also flavors the work. And for me, it's a way to make sense of existence for me, my personal existence, and sort of my reason for being here. And it feels like messages that I'm getting. And so, yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's a special kind of like experience for me.
Um, and I read, I feel like I'm like a stalker. I'm like, I read also, but I did read that some of this kind of shift to focus on the other characters in the frame and the shift to pastels was part of happened after you visited or spent some time in Paris. And so I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on maybe what that means for you as somebody of Haitian descent to be,
Yeah.
yeah.
My Paris is a really special place to me. I did a residency in grad school right outside of Paris, and that's where I kind of started to grow this language of the imagination and kind of trust my mind instead of looking at references and images. So it's a place where this sort of had enough time to like, it was an incubator for me. Um, and then of course throughout the years I've grown with the language, but I was feeling like I needed sort of a boost of inspiration, and I wanted to simply look at beautiful things. And yeah, I just booked a flight to Paris really quick. Um, I usually return there. I do solo trips there all the time. And I spent a few days looking at art, just kind of wandering, no real intention, just eating and looking at artwork. And there was a show at the Louvre, Paris to Naples, or was it Naples to Paris? But it was all this painting, kind of like Italian painting in the French museum, and sort of like mixing. And there was a lot of mythology. There was, grand scenes. There was war, there was love, there was, trickery. And I felt sort of re inspired by those because I allowed myself to just enter it looking for beauty and standing behind that. And I came back and I realized that my color palette was slightly changing. And it started with that kind of sky blue. And then I just leaned into that and kind of gave myself the challenge to paint with a certain group of colors and still try to get that sort of otherworldly feeling.
That I love how much beauty is such a part of your process and your desire to both see and then put into the world, obviously like through your work. And it also feels, I'm not totally sure that we need to go into sort of the why beauty is needed in our particular moment now. It feels maybe obvious to many people that there are a lot of things going wrong. But I guess I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit. Hearing you just talk now made me think about what dramas you are seeing within the paintings that you're producing themselves, right? So you're talking about kind of seeing these scenes of beauty and being immersed, but I'm curious about like what particular things you are showing, I
Yeah,
guess. What are the
yeah. I think with all of my work, it's narrative, but it's not a narrative I can follow. And each painting is there and makes me aware that there's so much more going on outside of it. And I've caught like a moment in time, but that moment's already gone, and now I'm painting the residue of it. But I feel like I forgot your question, honestly. My brain.
That was a good. No, I mean, it was mainly just sort of like, what are we seeing? The scene,
What
like
are we
what
seeing?
themes
Right.
that we're entering into.
Right. The scenes we're entering into, I don't fully understand them, nor do I want to. I think mystery is a really important part of my painting sort of communication with this process. I get really bored if I have something figured out. So I often will throw in challenges in my painting, whether it's a new palette or, you know, a reduced palette or whatever, a different scale, to kind of give myself something to push against, some friction. And so mystery serves as that for me. I assume that these images are just these characters living, whether that's loving, whether it's hating, whether it's gossiping, whether it's, you know, sharing secrets, or just being out there and just being proud and sort of open. um, I think the underlying kind of message in all the work is vulnerability and softness, but also strength.
Yeah, I love that around vulnerability, especially because it feels like so many of the paintings, they show beings relating to each other, right? So it's sort of, you can get a sense um, of vulnerability within the character or the quality of their relation. And then you've already talked about vulnerability in relation to your process, right? Um, I guess, are there other elements of vulnerability that you want to um, point out within the paintings?
I think the fact that the characters are allowing themselves to appear for me to kind of translate is, I think, the most vulnerable part of this process, because it means that they're trusting me and I'm trusting them. And ultimately, it stems from like making imaginary friends as a kid. And these are just my grown up imaginary friends. So I think creating loved ones and creating supportive characters and letting whatever's inside come out on the canvas, even if I don't understand it or I don't have the words to understand it, is the most vulnerable part of this work.
Um, it makes me, I feel very curious about your process now, sort of like, I don't know, do you take lots of long walks? Are you like
A lot
meditating?
of sitting and staring, honestly, a lot of sitting and staring. I think I love to like have books around, of some of my inspirations, William Blake, El Greco, um, the list goes on. And I like to kind of sit and then absorb. I have periods of absorption. That was the trip to Paris. That was, you know, my summer. That was these books. And then I have a period of everything's closed. I watch, you know, I'm really picky about who I hang out with and what I watch and what I eat. And I just kind of go back into a sort of state to be receptive to the images, to the feelings that create the images. Um, but in the studio, it's a lot of sitting and staring, honestly, just into the void, and also staring at the canvas, staring at colors, just letting things kind of percolate and kind of come up as they want to. There's no way to rush this process. I've tried, it doesn't work. There's no way. Um, I have to like put my trust in the process, in these characters. Um, yeah, and I think music is also a big part of my process, and dancing as well. I'm not a dancer, I'm not a musician. I don't have the greatest taste in music, but I think having things that I can kind of replay and replay until it becomes like a meditation is really important for me. Because I'm looking for a sort of opening of the heart and just like a transmission of myself out in order to allow the images in.
That was incredibly profound and and awesome. I'm wondering a little bit about like how I'm, if this ever goes too far and you're like, I don't want to, you know what I mean? Like you've transmitted.
Yeah, I've been there. I think at the start of when I was in grad school and sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to say, I originally thought I wanted to be like a photorealistic, very traditional painter. And I got to grad school that, specifically did that. And I realized it wasn't enough. It was flat, and I wanted to add some more. So in the beginning, I was really scared because I was painting these presences, and I was like, what is pushing me to paint these presences? And at that time, it would be like a hand on the shoulder or the end of a wing leaving. They weren't as in your face. And so now that I've like opened up, I'm fully ready. I'm like, whatever comes is what comes. This is my life's work. I don't do drugs, so that helps. Like, like I'm not gonna do I'm not gonna take mushrooms or anything because I do feel like that would open me up in a way that I didn't, I don't want to. But in terms of my process with this work, it's like my responsibility to give it a place here in this world.
I mean, it's interesting you're talking about the hand, feeling the hand on your shoulder, because it does sort of feel like you're translating sensualities from like all these other senses into the painting, into the paintings, I guess, which is
Yeah. Touch is a huge part of the work. Everything is touching, whether it's, flames overlapping or colors kind of, becoming a gradient. It's all about touch. And I think that is one of the most important parts of like um, knowing is like the touch, you know? Um, so yeah, I would say it's really important. Why? I don't know. Don't really need to know, but I know that it is like one of the pillars of my work.
I mean, I hesitate. I want to know, like, how do you sort of know when the transmission is like,
Right. Usually I know when a title comes to me. I never really start out with a title. I'll keep going and keep going. And then I'll be like, now's a good place to rest. But I never really consider anything finished. It's always moving and evolving. And I think to give it a finishing line kind of it reduces excuse me, it reduces that freedom. Um, so yeah, I just keep going until I feel it. And then I'm like, you rest for now. I never kind of, give it a full stop, understanding
okay.
that it's moving, it's growing, it's adapting.
Hmm. Do you want to, maybe we should look at one of the paintings from the show and talk about the title a little and sort of how,
Sure.
um,
Yeah, you can pick one and then we can go from there. I couldn't possibly pick one.
they're all, well, I'm sure they all say different things for you. I
They
mean, I
do.
guess I'm curious about okay, we can do this. It appears in solitude.
Yeah, that one. Um, that painting for me served as a bridge between previous works and this new work, sort of with the color palette being introduced, but also this sort of somber, dark environment where it's iffy. We don't know if this person is happy or sad or whatever, but it's definitely not enthusiastic, right? And I wanted that to kind of be the beginning of it, this solitude, not only to talk about my process and how much solitude is important to me, to be able to hold all of this, but also the solitude of this particular character, which is one of these guardians that have been, guarding this other character, this main character for so long. And now she's out of the picture. She's a viewer. Now this character is trying to figure out, what am I if I'm not working or I'm not serving or I'm not being useful? And that's just a character in a space with the elements and being with themselves and not really having to do anything. They're just existing.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm also, the it there feels very like potent and nebulous to me
Yeah,
as the title. Yeah, it's
yeah,
yeah. I'm curious. The one I was thinking a lot about is a remembering.
yeah. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Um, Yeah. I mean, I can tell you why I was so compelled by it. I
I
mean, I really
love
like
that.
the
Yeah,
show in
tell me your
general,
interpretation.
but I mean, I think, well, you were already talking about dance, but I love the forms of entwinement for this. And just the like, I don't know. I just loved the way that they were kind of wrapped up in each other, but still a little focused on their own kind of thing. And I think I was honestly surprised by the title. I was kind of expecting like eternal love or like, I mean, not
Yeah. No, I
not
get it.
about your titles, but I was expecting something more like intimacy forward in my head. Yeah.
Yeah. This painting for me is about leaving something and sort of leaving things behind. Um, you see there's all that gray and sort of tumultuous space behind them, and they're both moving into a brighter part of the painting. And for me, it's like remembering that there's power in choosing where you want to be and like leaving something that doesn't serve you, or choosing to experience something else, and bringing people along with you. And these two characters, they're very intertwined, like you said, but they're not looking at each other really. They're both kind of looking out into the distance. And I think that kind of shows that they're close, but they're also their own minds and they're having their own experiences. And it's the same for all these other characters, these other sort of cherub that are flying beneath them and the cloud face and things like that. They are also having their separate experience, but they're moving as a group.
Yeah. And I'm also thinking like it looks like a little, I don't know, it's like cloud, but it looks like it could be a chain around the ankle.
Yeah, it's a sort of cloudy flame. It's a hybrid. And like I said before, I'm always looking for new ways to paint the things that I keep painting: wings, scales, hair, fire. And I really wanted to really experience that sinewy kind of sensual application of paint, where it's not about being perfect, it's about implying what the thing is and trusting that the message will get across. And that sort of like trust in the image, trust in the process is, it was something I wanted to prove to myself. I think about all of the work is this trust.
Yeah. I mean, I think this was also the painting that I saw that I was like, ooh, the harpy in the chair behind. But I also was thinking a lot about other, I feel like I watch a lot of sci-fi related television, which I don't know, but like the scaled figure, I was like, is this like a Mesoamerican? It felt to me like it was also the blending of multiple different worlds of myths.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, you're not wrong. I think I'm creating my own mythology, but I'm not grabbing from nowhere. You know what I mean? It's coming through the things I've seen, the things that have been passed down to me. Um, all of that is in this kind of soup that's then becoming these paintings. And my job is just to let it out and to let it do its thing. And yeah, I do think that there's a lot of different bits and pieces of religion and mythology and some of my own stuff, some whatever that's just like mixed together to create a language to me that feels um, like something I want to see.
I know when we met last week, I was telling you that I have like deep fantasies about bringing my class to see this show because it feels like it's touching on a lot of our topics. But I'm curious if what kinds of responses because it feels like it's the kind of show that's going to touch people in a lot of different ways. Um, and so I'm curious if you have any responses to it that you'd like to share.
Um, I think responses vary, but I think my favorite responses are people who open themselves up to the work. And I think I've shared really special moments with strangers about the work where it's like we don't really have the words to say, but we're like looking in each other's eyes, and maybe we're sort of getting emotional, but there's no words. I think those are my favorite interactions because I am trying to transcend the things of this world, gravity, the word no, like just, you know, whatever sort of box that is waiting for me, I'm trying to kind of blow it open. So um, I think words don't always have to be here. And I think those are my favorite interactions and reactions uh, to the work.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah,
And that's great. Yeah. I mean, it makes me, think about your broader framing is sort of just imagination and possibility and yeah, just sort of like how important it is, right? And how to sort of, I guess, value it.
yeah. Imagination is survival to me. And I think it is for most of the world, whether people acknowledge it or not. You have to be able to imagine something different in order to be something different or do something different. Um, it takes a lot of imagination to to recreate yourself, to give yourself to the power of change in your life. It's imagination is that's the blood in the veins for me. Um, and I think that there's nothing impossible in that sort of state of mind. And it can become an escape where you can be refueled, sort of reconnected to then face real life. Um, but yeah, imagination is like, that's what it is. These are imaginary sort of people and experiences and creatures, but they do a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, sort of even just on the like the non-specific level of just showing the potence of what is not already visible, right? But can be produced.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Are there any other things that you want to share with us about the show or?
Um, it's very near and dear to my heart. And I know like the art world is a commercial place and whatever, but I make these works for myself and hopefully um, the energy that I put into it, the emotions, the feelings, the kind of questions and answers I put in there, or I'm allowed to kind of like receive. I hope that um, it resonates. Um, and I think that's the most important part to me is that it can do some sort of healing beyond healing myself.
I mean, I guess I have maybe one last-ish question, but when you see these, do you go back to the place where you were in when you were making them, or does it feel like it transports you into another kind of space?
It connects me to the past for sure. Each body of work, I think, coincides with some part of me growing, and growth isn't always easy. Um, and that's why there are flames in there, sort of as change, because change is hard and it can be painful. Um, but I think at each moment with these bodies of work, it's kind of like a snapshot for me as well as it is for them. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was really, Magli, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know it's a little early-ish for questions, but hopefully we have some already.
Sorry, I'm like, okay. Thank you both so much. That was so amazing and so insightful. I loved getting a little glimpse into your brain, Naudline. Okay, we have some questions. The first is from Kate, who asks, can you talk about leaving behind reference photos into intuitive paintings? What did you leave behind and what did you gain through adopting a new process? And was there any pushback from your mentors in grad school?
Yeah, there's always going to be pushback. Um, there are people who didn't really get it and people who were like, okay, you know, I think people want context. They want to put people in sort of boxes and understand them. So there was a little bit of resistance there. But in leaving image behind, or like the reference image behind, I just gave myself a certain amount of time, and I was like, you can only paint what you see in your head, literally as an exercise, nothing else. And I painted some weird stuff, weird, because I was still holding on to like the structures of my current existence. And as I started trusting the process more and more, I realized I don't need an anchor from this world in there. I can just do something that's completely different, and it's enough. So I think mostly it's trusting the ugly phases and sort of the cringe things, and knowing that you can destroy things that you don't like, or you can paint over them. But it's important to allow yourself that freedom to just paint what's in your mind. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. The next question is from Chloe.
Thank you so much, Naudline and Amber, for this conversation, which has been such a pleasure to listen to. Naudline, I'm curious if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit about the first time you remember making art. I'm really curious, like how art originated for you in your life, and then how it's expanded with your practice.
Yeah, you know, I was a math and science kid. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I'm a first gen American, so you know how that goes. So my whole life was kind of, I was in that trajectory to be very math and science oriented. So I didn't take any art classes until undergrad. Um, but I always had a little, like, I remember the folder, it was a blue folder, one of those generic ones. And I would have like printer paper and lined, ruled paper in there. And I would draw different characters, like women, um, mostly like clothes and outfits and vibes. But I always had a stack of women in there in that folder. And to me, it represented things I could be, or ways I could look, or, people I could transform into. Um, they weren't characters with wings or scales or anything, but they were fantasies for myself to kind of daydream into. And I also was like the go-to in class to like draw a turtle for my project or whatever. Like I just did that. So that's like my first interaction with making artwork that I can remember.
Thank you so much. I loved hearing that. Thank you, Naudline.
And the next question is from me. I was wondering, you said that it's like your figures are escaping capture. I was wondering why it's important to you that they do escape capture, given that you're creating these like utopic existences.
I think that even though this is like an ideal world, it's not perfect, the world that I'm creating. And there's space to be displeased, there's space to want to leave. Um, I think there's dark and there's light in that world. You need them both. So I think the escape is that, but also they're escaping being captured by me in a certain way, or this kind of this world, or this dimension. They're like resisting that capture. So they don't always like agree with me, or we don't always get along. It's not always a peaceful process painting. It can be tumultuous. And I wanted to kind of give those moments a chance to.
Thank you so much. I will definitely be thinking about this conversation for a very, very long time. So thank you so much, Amber and Naudline. Thank you to Sarah and Sasha and David from the James Cohan Gallery for their support in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. Join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Jenny Kendler and Julie Reese on the event of Other of Pearl on Governor's Island. And as Israel tradition, you can now turn on your microphone and say hello and goodbye as you leave.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.